Okay, so my name's Ed, and I'm going to talk you through the TRACC system today. So I've been working with TRACC for about 8 or 9 years now, and we've implemented TRACC into about 220 NHS organisations. So it's a very well embedded system within the NHS, and I hope you guys, will find it easy to use, and because we've used it with so many organisations, we're fairly well embedded with the processes and so on for the NHS. So hopefully this will all work very nicely for you. I'm going to talk you through today the bits for recruitment managers. So we're going to go through the system, but we're going to focus on the parts for the recruitment managers. So it will be the tasks that you guys have to complete in the system. And we'll go through it in order, effectively from the start, where we will raise a vacancy, and then we'll go through advertising, shortlisting the candidates, providing the interview details through the system, and then recording those interview details, and then finally looking at when a candidate gets to offer, and their employment checks, so the references and things like that will be relevant to you. So the first thing I just want to mention is that the TRACC system is all online, okay? So to get to it, you literally just need to go to the internet and you need to go to admin.tracc.jobs. And I've just highlighted it there in the top left of my screen. So I'll just leave that there for a second. So admin.tracc.jobs. And if you go to that site, it will take you to your login page. Now, we have sent out logins for all the recruiting managers, I think, across Plymouth, but there's obviously a lot. And some of you might have not seen that when it was first sent, or you might have not been on the list because maybe you've not recruited recently and you might not have had an account necessarily in NHS jobs. So if that is the case, just contact the recruitment team or ourselves here at TRACC, and we can give you an account and get that set up for you so that you can get logged onto TRACC. Okay, so when you are logged on, you will see a screen that looks a little bit like this. I am logged on to my recruitment account. Okay, so that is slightly different. In the recruitment account, I can see an overview of the whole organisation as such. For you guys as recruiting managers, you will see the vacancies that are relevant to you. So when you log on, you will see your vacancies in the middle of the screen. And if you don't have any vacancies, it will be a fairly blank dashboard. So if you get onto the system now and it doesn't look quite like this, don't worry, it will just be that you don't have access yet to many vacancies and you might not have a vacancy in the system, but it will still allow you to go in and raise a vacancy request and do the bits that you guys need to do. So that will be absolutely fine. So once you get onto TRACC and you've got your password set up, you're going to get onto a page again that looks like this, and I'm going to go through the main bits that are relevant for you. And before we get into the kind of process, I just want to show you this support tab here. So again, I'm just going to leave that there for a second. The support tab and the user guide is really, really useful. So it breaks down the system into all the different stages that you might need. Okay, and it's all laid out nicely for you. So if we go to support and we go to user guide here, which you will all have. So once you have an account on the system, you can all get to this bit of the system here. You can click onto user guide and it will actually open it in a new tab. So in a new tab here, we've now got our user guide. And the bit that is most relevant for you guys as recruiting managers is going to be this key manager help pages here. So key manager help pages in the top left-hand corner, and it breaks down the process into those different stages that I just mentioned. So creating a vacancy request, shortlisting applicants, providing the interview details, and then recording the outcomes and checking references. There's also a little bit of an introduction to TRACC, a little bit like this today, but not in as much detail. Okay. And then what we also have are the manager tutorial videos. So if you prefer to see the mouse moving around and clicking on the different buttons and so on, that's absolutely fine. The videos will show you that, and it might just feel a little bit more interactive and show you where to click and so on. So please make the most of this user guide. You can have it open as you're working through the live system on the left-hand side here. You can have two different tabs, so you can keep it open and you can refer back to it. And if I click on one of the tabs on here, it will then just show you the kind of detail that it goes into. So the buttons that you need to press, the screenshots are all there. So you can just follow the screen through, and the system should look exactly the same as this when you're on it for yourselves. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an intro into that, the dashboard and the help guide. Okay, if this help guide is not enough and you're still struggling, there is a contact information or contact details that you can contact to come through to ourselves here at TRACC. And that is going to be open for you guys as recruiting managers until the 7th of June. Now, in a moment, I'll show you those contact details. They'll appear on the screen. So we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, just to be clear, after the 7th of June, we're not going to disappear or anything like that. But what would happen after then is that if you do have queries, go through to the recruitment team as normal. And then obviously if the recruitment team is still not sure because it's new and it's a TRACC thing that, that hasn't come up before, then they can obviously contact us and get that answer back. And then obviously we can feed that back to you guys. So until the 7th of June, contact us directly as much as you want. And then after the 7th, if you just go back through the recruitment team, and then if there are any issues, we're obviously still going to be there for the recruitment team to help and hopefully iron out anything that happens beyond that date. Okay, so we want to go through the process. So I'm going to start with the vacancy approvals. Now, to give you a little bit of background, the vacancy approval process has been completely brought into TRACC. So from this week, it's the 17th or 18th today, from this week, we're actually raising the vacancy requests in the TRACC system. So that completely replaces the kind of old authorization process that you previously had with the paper forms and so on that were emailed around. So that's no longer the case. We're now going to be doing it through the system here. So when you need a vacancy approved, you need to go onto TRACC and you need to raise the request in the system. Okay. So once you get logged on, you're going to go to this button here that says recruitment. Now, again, as you're logged on as a manager, you won't have as many options, but you will have this button here that says recruitment. And when you click on recruitment, you will then have your different options. And again, I've got loads of options here, but they're not all relevant to you. You won't see as many as this, but you will see this vacancy authorization request here on the left-hand side. And this is where we need to go. So again, I'll just leave that there for a second, but vacancy authorization requests, this is how we go into the system and raise a new vacancy request. So I'll click on that button. It will take me through to another screen, which you don't need to be too worried about. You can click on new vacancy request here. Okay, and it will then take us into this page here. Okay. So in this page, it is all about searching for a previous vacancy. So I can search by department. I can search by grade. So I might want to go to, let's say, band 5. I can even search by discipline or sector. So if it's in administration or if it's nursing and midwifery, I can go in and I can filter it down. And what we can always do as well is, if we know what the vacancy is that we're looking for, is we can search for a similar vacancy by a keyword. So maybe the job title or the reference number. Now, the reason we have this is that when we're raising a request through TRACC, we actually do ask for quite a lot of information. So we don't want a situation where a vacancy has been approved, but you don't have the information to advertise the role. So recruitment then have to come back to you guys as managers. That obviously builds in a bit of a delay, and we want to try and avoid that. We want to try and make things as efficient as we possibly can. Okay, so in order to try and achieve that, we make sure that we get all the advertising information up front so that when the vacancy is approved, it can then be advertised pretty much straight away. Okay, now I do appreciate that based on your old process, that might feel like a little bit more work. And try and see it as the same amount of information, but we're just adding it in at a slightly earlier stage. But to help with that, because we're asking for all the details, it will help you if you are able to find a previous job and actually use it to populate the form for you. Because if you choose a previous job, it will pull through things like the advert text, it will pull through the documentation, so the job description, the person spec, the role requirements that you will shortlist against that we will come on to a little bit later on. That again can be quite in depth. All of that will pull through. And at this moment in time, we've already advertised on TRACC, I think around 150, even more jobs. We've been live a couple of weeks. So there's a lot of volume going through the system. All of those vacancies are going to be in this list. So even though we're fairly new, we do have a lot of vacancies here. So, as I start to filter it down, my band 5 jobs are showing. So it's already worth, even at this point in time when we're new to it, looking for a previous job. Now, one final thing I'll just mention is that if you do choose a previous vacancy, you will have the ability to edit it. So if you don't like the advert text, or it was at a different site or a different location, or last time it was full-time and this time it's part-time, that's absolutely fine. You can make those amendments, but it will just give you the core kind of details of the vacancy to help you complete the form a little bit more quickly, as opposed to having to add all those details. So you can click on these blue hyperlinks. You can figure out whether or not that vacancy seems to be appropriate to you. And if it is, you can select it with this little bullet point here on the left-hand side of that job. So I'll choose that vacancy there, and I will go down and I will click on continue, and it will now take me through to that approval form. Okay. So when we go into the approval form, hopefully a lot of this will be recognisable from your old process, but it is just now being brought into the TRACC system. So what happens is we have a lot of the vacancy information here, like the advert details, the advert text, and everything else that you would expect. So we'll just start by having a look through the form and seeing what's in here. So things like the contract type, the working pattern, so permanent, okay, any additional contact details, contract details there, whether it's full-time or part-time or so on. And as I was mentioning, if you want to change any of this, that's absolutely fine. So you can go over there and you can override it. You can make this vacancy different to the last one, but it just means that the core information is actually there from the last time. So things like the band and the salary, they're all going to be in there. So it will hopefully just make things a little bit easier for you. As you can see, we ask for things like the DBS information, the professional registration, any key dates, closing dates and times, the interview date that you might want, the vacancy site. So all this information should be fairly familiar to you. It's just broken down into these different tabs. Okay, so when we have the advert details, and all this information is in here as well. Now, the page that I just want to look at first, so all of this is hopefully fairly okay. But what might be slightly different is just this authorization tab here. Okay, so the authorization tab, even though we have chosen a previous vacancy, the authorization tab is actually unique because this is specific to the request that we are currently raising. So this is more like the information for finance, if it's required, the information for the vacancy inbox so that they know that it's a like-for-like post or whatever it might be. So that kind of, the real information about the job that we absolutely need is on this page, and it's all going to be blank to start with. So even though we've chosen a previous vacancy, you will see that on this first page there are a lot of blanks, and we do have to go through and fill these out because they are specific to the request that we are currently raising. So if we have a look through, we have the cost code. Okay, it's a drop-down list, so hopefully it should be fairly easy to find your cost code. As you start to type in, numbers or letters in there, they will drop down. So if you roughly know what your cost codes are, you can put them in there and hopefully you can find them. I know that the finance team are going to be keeping those up to date. So we've done some training with those about uploading the cost codes into the system. So hopefully that cost code list will be relatively up to date, but obviously things do change very quickly. So if you ever can't find your cost code, it's worth pointing that out to finance or the recruitment team, who hopefully will be able to help you with that. We then have the position numbers, okay, and this is the ESR position number here. Now, I believe that this has been distributed based on your divisions and areas that you work in, so each area has a list of its own position numbers. So hopefully you can refer back to that and you can find your position number and you can put it into there. Again, if you're unsure about anything like your position number or your cost code, it's a question ready for the recruitment team or finance, and they'll be able to work that out between them. So I'd go to the recruitment team first if that's ever an issue, but hopefully that will be distributed or already has been, and you should be able to refer back to that to find what the position number is. We then have the job reference, the job title. The job reference is not relevant to you guys. You can leave that blank. That is okay. But these things here, so the reason for the vacancy request and then our additional questions, these are really important. So reason for vacancy request, we could say that it is a newly created post, or we could say that it's potentially a vacant post or somebody's gone on maternity leave or whatever it might be. So we can select our relevant option here. Okay. So if I choose a vacant post because somebody is leaving or has left the organisation, it then asks us for the relevant information. So we have the leaver's name, notice date, and the leaving date. So if you know who is leaving, we can go put their name in there. If we know it, we can put in the notice date and the leaving date. And if you know that, I really would encourage you to put that in. It really does give us then good reporting data and so on in the system, which is what we want. Finally, with that, we can have multiple levers. So if we've got 2 levers here, we can add another row, and we can add a second lever to the organisation as well. So you can have multiple people leaving on the same vacancy. I'll just remove that, and we'll just leave myself in there for now. We then have the additional questions. So we have this question here, which is a TRACC question. Really, it's fairly standard. So this is being used again across the majority of the NHS. So most people will be answering this question. And then we have the specific questions for you guys that have been added. So we discussed these prior to going live, and this is what's either on your current form or what we needed to have built into the current process. So we have described the need for the post. We have please provide the details of your current establishment. And we have is this post in the current run rate, so you can see there. Okay. Now those are all mandatory, so we do need to leave an answer in there. And hopefully you know what those mean, and they're already on your current process, hopefully, so you can go in and you can put the same answers as you would have done on the forms in the old process. Okay, we have a target employment start date. Now this is just for information, so it's not kind of going to be, it's not absolutely going to be the start date. It might not always be feasible. We don't know the notice period of the candidate that's leaving and things like that. So it's an indication, but it isn't anything more than that. So just be aware of that. And then we have the advertising scope, so public, internal, or restricted. So you can put in what you want this to be here. And then finally, at the bottom of the screen, we then have the approvers. And this is probably the most important bit of the whole form. So this is who is going to approve the vacancy. Now, just before we put some names in here, I'm just going to go back to the top of the screen and just kind of highlight to you this section here. So we have this guidance at the top of the screen, and it's really, really important. Okay. So in here, we've got a few things. So first of all, I've got the contact information for the TRACC team here. So we can email plymouth@tracc.systems, or we can telephone plymouth@tracc.systems, the same team, on 01629 702 421. And you can see that information here. So if you ever forget it, it is embedded into the system there. There's then some information about who needs to be the approvers for the vacancy. And this isn't the entire details for this. There was actually a spreadsheet that has been distributed. Okay, I believe there's still some discussion around that, and there's potential that we will send an email out again. So keep an eye out for that if you don't believe you've already had it. But effectively, there was a table, and it will say for your division or your area of work who needs to approve the vacancy. And there are some different rules depending on the scenario. So, for example, if it is a like-for-like post and it's beneath a certain band, it can go straight through to the vacancy advertising inbox, and they can advertise it. So the recruitment team can just advertise those positions. Some roles will need financial approval, so they will then need to go to the authorisers. But one thing that's really important, and I think there's been a few of these sent through in the first couple of weeks, which is fine. It's as you'd expect, just a few, process things that we just need to iron out. And one of the main ones is this here. So at no point should you be emailing the accountants directly. So in all examples, when finance needs to get involved and they need to approve the vacancy, it needs to go to the finance staffing inbox, not to the specific individual within the finance team. So that's really important. So if you can just kind of make a note of that, refer back to this guidance. And as I say, look for the email that was distributed with the spreadsheet in. And if you don't have that, it's worth just raising that and flagging that with the team at Plymouth as well. Okay. Now, in terms of those inboxes, I haven't put them in there in terms of what they actually are. And the reason for that is that when you go down to that approval section again, so back to our approvers, if we go into here and we actually just start to type something in. So if I go to vacancy, let's say, you can see the vacancy advertising inbox just drops down there. So you don't need to know what it is. If you start to type in vacancy, it will then appear here, and you can just click on it. And the same for finance. So if we went to type in finance, it will drop down and we have that finance staffing inbox as well. So it should be nice and easy to find those contacts, just start to type them in. They will drop down and you can then add them to the system. Okay, now I don't think this is a real example. You're not going to send it to advertising inbox and then finance, but I just wanted to demonstrate one other bit of functionality. So if there is a case where you need more than one approver, so when it goes to like, the line manager and then the finance team, depending on what role it is, service manager and so on, we can set the order of approvers here on the right hand side. So with these numbers, if you just utilize these here, and you can change them to like 1, 2, 3, for example, that will mean that this approval will go in a chain. So when the first person gets the email vacancy advertising inbox in this example, they would log on and they would approve that vacancy. Okay, that would then trigger the email to the second approver, which is number 2. They would then go in and then they would approve that vacancy. So if it needs to be a chain of approvers, which again is on that distributed spreadsheet that was sent out, if it needs to be a chain, just make sure that's replicated in here, because otherwise everybody's going to get it at the same time. And in some examples, finance could only approve it, after somebody else has already done it in the process. So just important to get that right in terms of the order. So really, really important. I hope that all makes sense and it's nice and easy for you to send through. A lot of the examples are quite straightforward. So, going through to the vacancy advertising inbox, they should be nice and easy. Now, as we work through this form, okay, as you can see, there's this information that we need to put in. One thing I just really would advise, particularly when you're new to the system, is that we do save a draft periodically. So as we're working through the system, I really don't want you to lose any of your work or anything like that. And it's obviously going to take you a little bit longer when you're not familiar with TRACC. So it'd be very frustrating if you kind of start the process and then lose that. I wouldn't want that to happen. So just make sure that you press Save Draft. And when we click on Save Draft, we want to see that it does save. So when I click on Save Draft, we should get a green bar at the top of the screen and it will say Vacancy Draft Saved. Now, if there was anything missing or I had not been on the system for longer than 15 minutes and it had locked me out, it would ask for my password and things like that. If that happens, it's not necessarily saved. So it's really important that you see that this draft vacancy is saved and you see that green bar there. Can you see at the top of the screen? So if you are saving it, make sure you see that, because then you can be assured that you could then go back to your dashboard, you could log out of the system, could shut your computer down or whatever, and when you come back to the system you'll be able to pick this vacancy up where you left it. Okay, but if you don't see that saved draft, there's a good chance it hasn't saved, and obviously that's when you might lose that work, and as I say, that would be frustrating for you, and I just don't want that scenario to happen. So just make sure you see that draft vacancy saved. Okay, so if we continue to work through, I'll not go into as much detail on these tabs just because, it is the vacancy information. Hopefully it kind of all makes sense to you. I'll just pick out a few bits as we go through. Okay, so the first one I'm just going to mention are the key dates here. So just bear in mind that it's going to default to today's date when we approve the vacancy or when we submit the vacancy for approval. Now, it's not necessarily going to be approved on the same day, obviously. It's got to go through that process and that might take a bit of time. Exactly how long that takes, probably we'll find out as we get more settled in and embedded with this process. But what you will find is that obviously you need to factor that time in to things like the closing dates here. So if you were to leave this as 2 weeks, that's absolutely fine. But let's say this wasn't advertised until the 23rd, 24th, 25th. We would then extend that 1st of June date to replicate the 2 weeks that you originally wanted. So just bear that in mind. And why that's so important particularly is the interview date here. So, if we were to leave this as the 1st of June, and then we put the interview date as the 3rd of June, because that's when we originally wanted to interview, that's fine, but there's a good chance that this actually doesn't get advertised today. So therefore it doesn't close on the 1st, and then obviously that date is no longer relevant. So just kind of factor that in, and I would probably work on the basis of 3, 4, 5 working days, and then just extend your interview date by that time. So, the date we're submitting it is not going to be the date that it's advertised, most likely. So just bear that in mind. So that was the first one I wanted to point out. We then have the location and the addresses. Okay, and hopefully that's all okay. We'll go through to advert details and a couple of things to mention on here. So NHS Jobs have changed their system. So we've now moved to the future version of NHS Jobs. Okay. With that change, they have changed the way that the advert is laid out. So where it was one text box, it is now these 4 text boxes that are split out. And we have the job overview, we have the main duties of the job, and we have working for your organisation. And then we have the detailed job description and the main responsibilities. So out of these 4, this one here that says working for your organisation, that's fairly kind of trust-wide. So if you don't put anything in there, that the recruitment team can put in a standard paragraph, but just bear in mind you might want something that's slightly tailored to your division or where you work in the organisation. So that one there is a little bit more generic. It probably replaces your header and your footer that you might have had previously, because on the new NHS Jobs there is no header and footer, so that's more like that kind of information. And then the rest of the information is more like your job advert and then information from the person spec and so on. Now, just to explain the background behind this, effectively NHS Jobs, the direction is that we bring as much information in from documents as possible and have it actually within the advert. Okay, and the reason for that is mainly around accessibility. So if you're using a screen reader or something like that to help you read the advert on the screen, it is much better that the data and the information is within the website itself as opposed to on an additional attachment where those processes might not necessarily work. The software doesn't necessarily work on a PDF document. So getting that information in the advert is what the direction of travel is, and that's why we see these 4 advert fields now as opposed to the 1 advert. Okay, so that's the first change I wanted to just point out. We then have the contact information. So again, hopefully that's all okay. We have the primary specialty, the staff group. We have the sectors and the disciplines. Now, this is another one just to make a note of, really. So sectors and disciplines, we have had this list in the system for a long time. They originally came from the Agenda for Change jobs families. Okay, so they're a little bit tricky to change. And what we have is we have something like 4 million applicant accounts in the system. Okay, so many of those candidates have signed up to receive job alert emails based on this list. Okay, so sometimes, depending on where you're working, you might find that your sector doesn't really fit in here very well. But what I want you to just consider is that candidates have signed up to receive job alerts emails based on this list. So if we were to add a new list or a new sector, it would really just kind of leave out all those candidates that have already signed up to these job alerts emails. And I don't want that to happen. We want to make sure you get as much exposure with your adverts to the candidates as possible. So when you're doing this, just think about what a candidate might have selected if they were potentially interested in work in your area. And what you can also do is you can select multiple disciplines. So don't be afraid to go through and add more if you're not sure. You can always go through and put them into different sectors here. So the more you add, obviously, the more kind of job alerts emails you'll be sending out through the system automatically. And that's what that part of the system impacts. It won't impact things like, the job title and everything and how that's displayed. So just be aware of that. Okay, so that's the sectors and the disciplines. We then have the documents. So again, we don't need to spend much time on this. This is just your documentation for the vacancy that you can upload into here. So hopefully that's nice and easy. We have long listing. Okay, for long listing, I would leave it as this. It sets to default by meets all essential criteria, meets some essential, and meets no essential. Leave it as it is. Okay, have a go with it potentially when you get to your advertising vacancy. And if you want to change this in the future, you can. But effectively, this is if you are filtering out your candidates prior to shortlisting. Most of the time, you'll probably wait until the shortlisting stage when the vacancy closes. So that's why I'm saying leave it as it is for now. But if you want to use it in the future, then you're obviously more than welcome to do so. The shortlisters, so who's going to be shortlisting the vacancy? So that's a little bit like your reviewers on NHS Jobs. So it doesn't just need to be one. We've said we need a minimum of one, but if you have multiple, then that is absolutely fine. We then have the interviewers as well. So that's going to be the same. And then finally, in the last point, I'm just going to talk about other role requirements. So the role requirements with the new service for NHS Jobs as well, another change that they have introduced is that the role requirements are now public facing. So it's very important that you're happy with these and that they are aligned with the person spec, and they are things that the candidate should be kind of tailoring their application towards. Okay, now because we've chosen a previous vacancy, this has populated for us. So that's absolutely, that will really save you time, because as you can see, they're quite in depth. So again, another reason to try and choose one of those previous vacancies at the very beginning. Okay, so just to add a new role requirement, we click on this button here, and just to explain the structure of that, we have the assessment method. So is it the application form or is it the interview? So I would go for application form. We have the type of criteria, and you want to think of that as your kind of header on your person spec. So it might be qualifications that you have on your person spec there. You can put that there. And then finally, we have the actual specific qualification. So maybe it's a degree or equivalent, and we can add multiple essential criteria. So we might add MVQ, okay, and then we can go in and we can add another one. So whatever it might be there. So you have your criteria, you have the overall type, and then you have the essential points and the desirable points within that. Very last thing, the score on the right-hand side. I would start by doing this out of 2. If you do it out of 2, when you get to your shortlisting and we do our scoring, if they partially meet it, we could score them 1. If they fully meet it, we can score them 2. And if they don't meet it at all, we can score them 0. So I've always found that to be a nice, concise, easy way of doing the shortlisting. You might find that actually you want that to be 1 and it's just yes or no, they have it or they don't. Or you might find you want a larger scale to be able to shortlist the candidates against. But I would start by trying it with 2 and then see how you get on from there. You can always change it the next time you put a vacancy through. Okay. Questions is the last tab. There are a list of questions. These are your filter questions and your blocking questions. So, if you do get candidates that don't have the qualification applying to your roles, it might be an opportunity to use these filtering and the blocking questions to try and improve the quality of the applicants coming through. So this might be able to help you here. Okay, and once you have worked through that form and you have been saving it, you've put in your approvers. So remember, really important that the approvers are correct and they are in line with the guidance that we have and the guidance that has been submitted. We can then go into here and we can click on request authorization. That will then trigger the email to the approvers. The approvers can go in and grant the vacancy, and then the recruitment team can advertise it. Now, if I click on request, it's going to give me error messages. I haven't completed everything. You will see the same. One thing just to note is that when you get this, you can click on these hyperlinks and it will take you to the relevant bit in the system, and that makes it nice and easy to find the bits that you might have missed. So look for the red sections and then click on these hyperlinks here as well. Okay, but if I go back to my dashboard, so I'm not going to submit that one, we can then see, sorry if you can hear that on that side, we can then see the vacancies that we have submitted. Okay, so you will be able to monitor vacancies that you have submitted to the approvers, and you will be able to see who's approved them and who hasn't. And then when they get to granted, you'll be able to see them here, and then they will be advertised by the recruitment team. So one of the advantages of putting it into the system is that you will then have complete visibility over your vacancy as it goes through. Okay, so hopefully that's all okay. Any questions, obviously you can get in touch with the team here with those contact details that I showed you earlier on. So that's the approval stage. That's the most in-depth bit that I wanted to go into. We'll now have a look at how we shortlist applicants and how we provide the interview details. And all of this should be fairly straightforward. We can just follow the system, which will kind of lead us through it. So your vacancies are going to be advertising here. So you'll be able to see your vacancies that are advertising. And just bear in mind that vacancies advertise on multiple platforms. So we advertise on your website, we advertise on our jobs boards, we can advertise on social media as well. So LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. We can advertise on all those platforms. And one that we also still advertise on, which is really important, is NHS Jobs as well. So we still post vacancies to NHS Jobs, but it is now the future service, so the new version of NHS Jobs, which is why we saw those advert changes. Now, what's really important to understand is that wherever we post our vacancy to, our candidates will always apply in TRACC. So when they go to click on apply, they will be taken to their TRACC portal, so apps.tracc.jobs, and they will be asked to log into here. They will log in and they will submit their application. So you guys as managers don't need to be looking at multiple websites to actually manage the applications. You're only going to log into TRACC to see that. Obviously, you might want to go onto NHS Jobs to see your vacancy and see what it looks like. But in terms of managing the applicants, that is now all done through TRACC. So you will log onto the TRACC system, you will see all the applicants that have applied, and they will be in the system here. Okay. So when our vacancy closes, our applications are going to move to shortlisting, and you guys are going to be notified. So you will get your email notification that your vacancy is in the shortlisting stage. You will click on the link in the email and it will take you through to a page that looks exactly like this. And one thing to bear in mind as well is that in the email, it will give you the link to the user guide. So going back to our user guide, it will give you the link specifically through to how to shortlist applicants. So just bear that in mind. That will be in the email. So you can click on that link and come through to this page, and that will hopefully help you as you work through. So this example I have on the screen, I'm down as the shortlister for this test vacancy. There are multiple applications here on the right-hand side, and you can see that I am listed as the shortlister, which is exactly what you will see when you are logged onto your vacancies. Finally, we can see how much shortlisting we have done. So we have scored 0 out of 3 applications. Okay, so we need to go in and we need to actually start the shortlisting process. In order to do that, it is the blue button on the right-hand side. So I'll just leave that there for a second. That's really important. Okay. The blue button on the right-hand side, that is how you get in to actually do the shortlisting. So we need to click on that. So we'll click on that button and it will take us into our shortlisting module. And what we see is the application form in the middle of the screen. Okay, this is a test application, so there isn't a lot of information, but as you can imagine, for your vacancies, there will be the information in here. Couple of things to point out: we don't show you personal information at this point, so you won't see personal information here. You will see application ID numbers, and you will only see the sections on the application form that have the actual questions that they answered against the criteria for the role. So that should be obviously what we're now scoring against. And we then see the actual criteria based on what was put into the vacancy. So a moment ago, we looked at role requirements. These are the role requirements here. So as we click through the different sections, it will tell us exactly what we are looking for. So it's a case of clicking in the different sections, looking in the application form, and then entering a score based on what you can see in the application form on the right-hand side. So I'll go through and I will put a score in for this candidate here. So let's say this was a fairly strong candidate. They met all the criteria, so I'll give them a high score. We can then press save and it takes us on to the next application. Okay, so you don't need to go in and out of the list. You can just continue to work through here. If you've got loads and loads of applications, you might not want to do it all in one go. If that's the case, that's fine. As long as you have pressed save between your applicants, it will have this blue bar here and it will tell you how many is left to score, and that is now saved. So if I were to close this system down, when I come back, it will take me back to where I've left off, so you won't lose anything. So with this one, we'll go through and we'll just put in slightly lower scores, let's say, just as an example. So just using our imagination, obviously, based on what was in the application form here on the right-hand side. We can then press save and it will take us on to our next application. Again, our blue bar is going to move along and it's going to tell us how many we have left to score. One final example I just want to give you is, let's say they don't have the minimum qualifications. So we need our GCSEs here in this example. Okay, it's a fundamental requirement for the role and this candidate doesn't have it. We could have used our blocking questions as well for this, but if somebody does kind of get through to this stage, it is then obviously, not worth pursuing the application. But I don't want you to have to spend time going through and scoring on the experience because, if they didn't have the qualification, we're not going to proceed with the application anyway. So don't spend your time doing that. So in that example, I would score them zeros all the way through. Okay. Go through, sorry, and we'll put zeros in here. And then I would utilize this note section here. So we can say in the notes, didn't have minimum qualifications, let's say, so didn't have. And then that will be your notes. When you get through to the next screen, you will be able to refer back to it. And that's what I would do for those examples. So that was our last applicant. So we can press save. And what it's now going to do, it's going to tell us that are we happy with the scores, or do we want to go back to the application list? So, if you're happy, we can click completed shortlisting. If you're not happy and you want to go back, you can go back to the list. So completed shortlisting, click on there. And it's now going to list our candidates in score order. So we will have our top scoring candidates at the top, and we will have our candidates here, but obviously listed in score order. Now, another thing to point out is that you will not see the application names still at this point. It is all based on the actual scores that we have done, and obviously no personal information. So we're going to choose who we want to interview based on these scores here. So we can see the scores. We can also see any notes that we might have left. Hopefully you can see that on the right hand side of the screen. Okay. One final thing I'll just mention here is the priority column that you can see here. So there are different priorities. So we have the 2-tick guaranteed interview scheme. We also have things like the armed forces, and then also potentially redeployment as well. So if somebody is on the guaranteed interview scheme, the 2-tick scheme, you will now see that 2-tick symbol in the priority column. And if you were to leave them behind, the system will warn you just to say you have left somebody behind that has indicated they're on the guaranteed interview scheme. Can you just check that they didn't meet the minimum criteria? Because if they met the minimum criteria, as we know, they need to be moved through to interview. So that process is built into the system for you to help you. So you don't really need to think about it as such. It will just be here laid out for you to work with. Okay, so I'm going to choose 2 candidates to interview in this example. So we tick to the left of their ID numbers, and we choose our relevant option at the bottom. So we have move to interview, and we do have a reserve list as well. So just point that out. That was a question that was raised on one of the earlier manager sessions. So there is a reserve list for you there. So we'll go move to interview, and always with the system, we just confirm the action that we just took. So we'll confirm moving those 2 candidates to interview. And then we have our final candidate left in this evaluate stage. Now, what I would encourage you to do is update the outcome for all of the candidates on the system. So, Alex is going to get a notification to say he's not successful. That's what we want. We don't want candidates to be left kind of in the dark and not knowing what's going on with their application. And it also helps with our reporting as well. So just make sure that you go through and you update the outcome for everybody. So we'll move this candidate into rejected. We have to confirm it. And in this example, we also have to leave a note just to make sure that that wasn't a mistake. It's quite frustrating if you accidentally reject the wrong person, because you have to then go to recruitment and try and get them back. So that note just tries to encourage that and make sure that that was the correct person. So we've chosen who we want to interview. Okay, so it's now a case of just moving our vacancy through to the next stage. In your account, it is going to give you the prompt bar in the middle of the screen, and it's going to tell you what to do. So if you're ever unsure, just have a look in here. Okay, and there will be a blue button, and it will say move vacancy to interview, which you can see is here for me. So I'll go to move vacancy to interview. So when we go through this process, again, it should hopefully just kind of take you through it. You can't miss anything out. If you miss anything, it will tell you. And it's just asking us the information. So what sort of interview is it? Is it face-to-face? Is it an assessment centre? Is it a remote interview? Okay. How would we like the candidates to be organised? So do we want to give them a choice, or do we want them to have the first available time slot? So first come, first served. Okay. Is it employer choice, maybe, where you're actually booking them in? A couple of examples that were raised again in one of our previous sessions were, you might book in some of the candidates and the rest will get a choice, and that's absolutely fine. So you can create a schedule, and then once it's set up, you can choose some candidates and book them in specifically. So you might have like your internal candidates first, or whatever it might be. You can manage that in the system if you need to. We then have the name of the interviewers, and this is going to populate from when we created the vacancy. Okay, we have the ability to add in a contact information. So let's say you want a phone number on there, so that if the candidate doesn't find the location, they can contact you on the day. That can go in there as well. We then have the time slots for the interviews. So these need to be at least 2 days in the future. So I'll set these to the 23rd. And we can see I've gone for 9 o'clock until 12 o'clock, and it's now giving me the options within that time period. So we'll do 6 times 30 minutes. So let's say you want a session in the morning and then a session in the afternoon. You would do that as 2 time slots. So we'll do one at 9 till 12, and then we'll do a second time slot. I'll do it on the same day We'll do 3 until 4, and we'll do 2 times 30 minutes. You can do it on subsequent days, or you can have it as one continuous run, however you want to do it. Okay, just bear in mind you need enough time slots for the number of candidates that you have provided or you want to interview. Okay, the last thing I'll mention here is that candidates are only made aware of the start time. So a good example would be you're doing a 45-minute interview with a 15-minute break. If that is the case, then just put them in as an hour, because the candidate will only be told when they need to attend, and then you can factor in your 15 minutes on the day when you're holding the interviews. Okay. The very last bit is the additional details. So would you consider any alternatives, yes or no? Okay. And then any special instructions for either the applicants, for the recruitment team, or for the interview panel. So maybe you're the lead interviewer and you want to tell your other interviewers that you're going to meet slightly earlier to go through the CVs. Okay, now the one that's used the most is the one for applicants. So this is any additional information, such as a presentation or a test that they might need to do as part of that interview. So anything in addition to the standard invite. So I'm going to click Move Vacancy to Interview, and that's going to send all of that information through to the recruitment team. The recruitment team are then going to finalize that, and that will then trigger the invites out to the candidates. So the candidates are invited to interview, and importantly, they are sent an email and a text message, okay, and they are sent a daily reminder until they either book their interview or withdraw their application. So obviously that really helps with people kind of just not turning up. We don't want that scenario. The daily reminders tends to encourage them to either book their interview or withdraw their application. And then they are sent another text message a working day or 2 working days before the interview, and it says, we are looking forward to seeing you on the day. If you can no longer attend, please reply with the word cancel, and that will then move them to withdrawn as well. So hopefully you can see we try and make it as easy as possible for the candidates to book their interviews or withdraw, so that you know whether or not they're going to attend. Finally, there is an interview pack generated by the system, and it will put together the application forms, the shortlisting scores, any notes that we've left on the application so far. It will put like a front cover together with the times that everybody is booked into as well. And it also has as an attachment your interview questions and the other attachments that you would have had previously before TRACC. Okay, now this interview pack is sent to you the working day before the interviews. Now I know that's a little bit late, so what I would encourage you to do is log on to the system, because at any point you can see who is booked in and you can look at their application, and you can also download the interview pack ahead of time. It's just that the one that is sent the working day before will capture anybody that has withdrawn following the text message going out. So if you download it early, cross-reference with the one that is sent to you the working day before. Okay, and that will obviously have the most up-to-date schedule. So hopefully that all makes sense. The very last thing I want to talk about today is updating these interview outcomes. Okay, so just like we did following the shortlisting scores, we move people through to interview. Following our interview, we want to do exactly the same and move people through to offer. Now, I would encourage you to actually go into the application here, because if you do that, it will allow you to put any attachments in there as well. So if I go into the I symbol for this candidate, it gives me the options to update their outcome. So they might be offer pending if they're successful. So offer pending for successful candidates, so really important. They might be a second choice kind of candidate or offer reserve. Okay, so that can go there. It might be that they were rejected or they did not attend the interview. In obviously that case, you can update the relevant one. But for successful candidates, just to reiterate, it is offer pending, and I will click on that button. So offer pending takes me through to a form. Okay, so in here, we then put in the offer details. And what we have the ability to do, okay, is to attach any evidence that you might have. So we can choose the file and we can put in attachments. So that could be your interview notes that could go in there. So you can still email them to recruitment, or you can put them into here. I think that process will get ironed out and finalized as we settle into using the system a bit more. Okay, and then it's just a case of going through and saying yes or no to the different options. So yes, we have contacted the applicant and they're aware, and then the offer details, which will populate from the vacancy, but you might just need to go in and put in anything that you discussed at the interview. Now, anything that you put in here is going to go through to the recruitment team, okay, and the recruitment team will then send out the conditional offer letter through the system. So if I update this and say offer pending, our candidate is going to go through to offer pending and they will go to the offer stage. So as long as you update the outcomes on the interviews, that's really your job done. And then the recruitment team can issue those offer letters and then we can go from there. Now, when our offer letters are sent, our candidate is going to go into offer. And just so that you're aware, that doesn't mean that you can no longer see the applicant. You can go in, you can look at the candidate's file, you can go into the employment checks, okay, and you will be able to go into here and see how those employment checks are progressing. So that's a really useful tool to have. You can see the progress that is being made. As you'll see when this loads in a second, you can see all of the individual employment checks and where they have got to. Okay, so you can go through and you can monitor this. And very last thing for today will be these references here. So references are submitted through the system. You can see the rest of their employment checks here. The one that is most important for you are the references. So the references are submitted through the system. Some of you may well have completed a reference before in TRACC. So it asks the referee to complete that reference through the system. That then comes back into TRACC and it will automatically go to with manager for checking. When it goes to with manager for checking, you guys will get an email notification and you can go in and you can view the reference. It will take you through to this screen here. So you click on the relevant one and it will show you the reference reply. So you'll be able to actually see the reference form and you'll be able to download it as a PDF as well if you wanted to. And then from there, you can make a decision as to whether you are happy with it, whether you want to request clarification, which will ask a question back to the recruitment team, or maybe you're not happy with it for certain reasons. So hopefully for the majority, that will be okay. You can click on success and that will be your part done in saying that, yes, you are happy with the reference and you confirm the dates and everything that are on there. So that will be what you need to do. Okay. So our candidates are all going to go green. Hopefully, you know, all these checks are going to go to a success. The recruitment team can then book their start date. They will liaise with you in the same way that it's been done in the past. And then the candidates will be booked on the system and you will be notified. And then eventually, once the candidate has started, they will be moved off the TRACC system and they will move to outcome and they will then drop off your dashboard and you will no longer have them. Okay. The recruitment team will download their file. So the personnel file will be downloaded and stored. And then that really marks the end of the TRACC process when the candidate starts in the post. So that's everything I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope you found that useful. If there are any questions off the back of this, then just come through to our team. So that plymouth@tracc.systems or the phone number as well that was in there. So if you go into recruitment and you go into vacancy authorization requests, okay, it will then give you that phone number at the top of the screen. So just bear that in mind. I'll just put it on the screen as the last bit now. So this bit here. So 01629 702 421. So any questions about anything I've said or when you're working through it, please feel free to call and get through to our team. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for your time. And yeah, good luck using the system and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.